everybody just sees, the negotiations part, and they think that that's all that we do. And I try, it's like the iceberg. That's 10% of the iceberg. The 90% of the iceberg is under the water. And so they don't see the managing client expectations, which I think is very, very critical. Managing client expectations is the hardest part of the job. You take the draft, for example, and someone says, well, I'm going to go in the first round. I said, where did you get that from? Well, JoeDraftSite.com just put me in the first round. I'm like, okay.
Welcome to Negotiation Warriors. I am Cliff Stein, and I am on a never-ending quest to learn what it takes to be a great negotiator. In every episode, I will sit down with some of the greatest negotiators in professional sports who will share insights, knowledge, and draw upon their real-life negotiation experiences. Negotiation Warriors is sponsored by Front Office 360, premium cap management software. To find out how we are helping college athletic programs, go to frontoffice360.com to schedule a demo. Welcome back to Negotiation Warriors, the podcast where we have conversations with some of the greatest negotiators in professional sports. Today's guest is one of the most respected and experienced player agents in professional sports. Peter Schaffer has built a long and successful career representing elite athletes. Some of his clients include Hall of Famer Barry Sanders, Steve Atwater, Jerome Bettis, Joe Thomas, Joe Mixon, Pac-Man Jones. Anyone else, Peter?
Well, you left that Hall of Famer Willie Roaf.
Willie Roaf. All right. He's got a reputation for being strategic, thoughtful, relentlessly prepared at the negotiation table. For me, the one thing that really stands out about Peter Schaffer is his ability to build strong relationships. He builds credibility, trust, and a deep understanding of both the player's goals and the team's perspective. He was also a star of a television show called The Agent. Peter has faced tremendous adversity in his personal life and continued to serve as an inspiration to many. I'm honored to welcome my good friend, Peter Schaffer, to Negotiation Warriors. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Cliff. With an introduction like that, I doubt I'll be able to live up to those expectations.
Well, I know you're always got great humility, so I'm really excited that you agreed to do this. So many places for you, Peter, to start, but I know people would be very interested to know, how did you become an agent in the first place?
Well, so things are a little different now than they were back when you and I first started. So I graduated law school. I was fortunate enough to get a job in Denver, Colorado, moved out here, did not go to law school planning on being a sports agent because it really wasn't a thing back then. So went to law school, started a big litigation firm here in town doing defense work. Said to myself, 24 years old, I enjoy eating macaroni and cheese. I could, the struggle, a single, the whole shooting match. And so I just said, all right, let's start a firm. So I had a partner. We started a firm and actually started a law firm and used the revenue from the law firm to fund the sports practice. So did every type of law there was: personal injury, domestic relations, insurance defense work, whatever it took just to be able to keep the lights on at that point, keep the lights on in both the office and the house.
Was there a specific player, or what led you to build the sports practice?
Ironically, because you're in Chicago and worked for the Bears for so many years, first client was a guy named David Tate. And he was an 8th round pick. So that tells you how long ago it was, because there's not even 8 rounds anymore. And did the first deal with Ted. And when Ted had your job as a contract negotiator, and I think his signing bonus was $16,300. And I held him out for training camp for 2 or 3 days because they were at 16,000 and we wound up at 16,300. So I held him out for $300 for 2 days. Chicago Bears. Go ahead.
You mentioned Ted Phillips, and Ted Phillips was also a guest on this podcast. And so David Tate was a Chicago Bear. How'd you get David? Was that your first client?
Yep. So University of Colorado, we're here in Colorado, and just I don't know whether it was charity on his part or whatever, but he gave us a chance, and so that's how you start. You start out with late round draft choices of free agents, and hopefully they work out. Hopefully you do great work for them, and hopefully they recommend you to other people, and hopefully you don't make too many mistakes in representing them that you screw up their career.
Where is David Tate now?
David lives here in Denver. He's a local legend. He was a great basketball player, just great outgoing personality, just the whole shooting match. But yep, Chicago Bear, number 49.
Love it. Did he make the team?
Made a team, played for probably 9 or 10 years, put away some money, owns a bunch of, I think, FedEx franchises, is doing really well.
So you spent 4 decades, right, in this business. Is that accurate?
This is my 4th decade. I tell people, because whenever you say that, people start doing the math to figure out how old I am. And I just say, well, I started when I was 6. So just.
So over 4 decades, you know so much about this business, and between having students that probably want to be agents, plus the hundreds of other students that are probably reaching out to you on a regular basis, what is it that you think people need to know about some of the biggest challenges of being an agent?
Well, everybody just sees, the negotiations part, and they think that that's all that we do. And I try, it's like the iceberg. That's 10% of the iceberg. The 90% of the iceberg is under the water. And so they don't see the managing client expectations, which I think is very, very critical. I actually teach, a whole week on how to manage clients' expectations. And it doesn't matter if it's just an agent dealing with clients, or even in your role as the team negotiator, on some level, whether it was Ted or Ms. McCaskey, you're dealing with your bosses or your head coach. And how do coach comes into your office and say, I want this freaking linebacker now, Cliff. I'm like, okay, I got it, but there's a process, or we want him for this amount of money, whatever. Or sometimes, when we have guest lecturers like yourself, if there's pressure, does that affect well, I'd want to get him for $5 million, but I'm so worried the coach is going to rip me a new one. You wind up paying $7 million. The same thing on the other side, managing client expectations is the hardest part of the job. And it's getting harder and harder each day, because it used to be, when we started, there was very little access to players. The players really got most of their information from newspapers, Sports Illustrated, and or us. But then all of a sudden now you have social media, and you take the draft, for example, and someone says, well, I'm going to go in the first round. I said, where did you get that from? Well, JoeDraftSite.com just put me in the first round. I'm like, okay. So then you also have other agents and other people direct messaging them and talk about, like, if Peter doesn't get you in the first round, you should fire him. And, so now you have all these external pressures, and then you have families and parents, and everybody's reading stuff. And so managing expectations is very difficult. And I always find that you want to just be as honest as you can, and under promise and over deliver. Now it's hard because in recruiting, everybody's offering the whole world. Agents are paying players to sign with them. They're promising them, Chipotle deals and Gatorade deals, and telling them that they'll get them in the Senior Bowl, all this stuff. And it all sounds good until they fail to achieve their goals or their mission.
Is there anything you can do earlier on in their career, like kind of prepare them that kind of information is going to be out there, so that you kind of help? Does that help manage the expectations?
Well, there's 2 things. One, with the NIL. So now that with the NIL, we're able to represent players in college. And so you have a chance to try to educate the ones you do represent. Problem is that there's a lot of agents out there that aren't certified even by the union now. You don't even need to have a business card anymore. And they're grabbing these kids, and they're not really educating them. They're not taking the time to educate them on taxes, on budgeting, on, we had a kid came to us last year, had another agent. I think got paid $200,000 in NIL for a senior in college. I mean, $200,000 for us in college, shoot, we could have lived 20 years on that. He blew through it all because he figured out, I'm going to keep getting it. Well, then he wound up being an undrafted free agent, got a $10,000 signing bonus. And so, the agent had done zero in terms of educating him on budgeting and taxes and all kinds of stuff.
So that's interesting. So, so it's difficult, right? The business model of being an agent, client expectations. What about people that think that this is a very lucrative profession?
Well, I would say that it can be lucrative if you're successful. But the one thing that people don't see is the work that's involved. 30 years or whatever in my fourth decade, I have truly not taken a day off and working in 30 years. And you have to be prepared for 24-hour phone calls, 7-day a week work jobs. Right now it's the holiday season, and we'll work on Christmas Day. We work on New Year's Day, obviously the bowl games. The NFL plays on Christmas Day now, Thanksgiving Day. Shoot, I worked on the day both my kids were born. Worked through when they both got sick. You have to. So yes, it can be lucrative, but it's also, it's if you want to make a lot of money and work 8 to 5 and go to the country club and have a normal life, then this is not the profession for you. And I tell everybody at the get-go, I'll tell you how to get in. I'll tell you how to succeed. I'll give you all the answers to all the tests, but there's no substitute for grinding. And you want to get in, you're going to start at the bottom in the mailroom or the training room or being a ball boy or whatever. And you got to grind. It's no different than being a coach in the NFL or a person in player personnel. Nobody comes in as a general manager.
Nobody comes in. No. And they all want to be one, right? Everybody wants
Right.
to be that person.
Nick Saban started as a grad assistant, and, Lane Kiffin started as a grad assistant, working 90-hour a week for $20,000. That's the deal. So the best part about being an agent, I don't know, the ability, I guess, to expose my kids to fascinating people from all walks of life.
That's very cool. I'm going to ask you about that too. But before I do, I think a lot of people don't realize that you're different to me also, because you're not just an agent. I mean, there are a lot of agents that are lawyers, but a lot of them haven't or don't practice law. You're very much a full-fledged sports law attorney. You represent clients in court, in cases, I believe, that are not necessarily related to contracts. Is this accurate? Are you like a one-stop shop, full-service agency when it comes to giving them that kind of level of service?
In terms of law, yeah, stay out of doing taxes, obviously. But I do think it's part of the deal to be able to. Now, there are times that a player will get involved in a civil litigation matter, in which case, if it's in a state that I'm not admitted to practice, then I might just oversee the litigation. I might sometimes be the expert witness, that type of stuff. But, if I can save the player money in legal fees by doing the majority of the work. And the reality is, in the sports world, if you can give great advice on the front side, then you could probably keep them out of trouble and litigation on the backside. So review, business plans, proposals, say absolutely not. You're going to lose your money on this. It's not a good idea. Or draft up the contracts, articles of incorporation, the bylaws, so that and anticipate things not going well, so that you don't have litigation on the tail end. That usually is the best way. If you spend the time on the front side to make sure that the deals are right, everybody's got the right expectations, then you can usually avoid some bad stuff on the backside, which the backside is always way more costly, because, then you're talking about litigation, and that gets into six figures and all kinds of stuff.
All right. So to summarize that, you're the agent. It sounds to me like you're also their general counsel.
Yes.
And you are a business advisor.
Business advisor, relationship advisor, pastor, priest, rabbi, physical therapist, orthopedic surgeon.
So you have to have an amazing Rolodex, right? Because you talked about tax issues and, specialties within the law that maybe you don't handle, and then finance people. I don't know, maybe real estate, maybe marketing, obviously all different kinds of physicians. Is that a regular part of your job where you're just making sure they have the right professional in their lives?
Yeah. We're connectors is what we are. And it's not just for my athletes, everybody in our life. Hey, Peter, I want to need a house inspector. Well, I got one, and if I don't have one, I really feel that I can get to just about anybody in this country within 2 calls or 2 people away. And that's really that's very important. A lot of young guys or young women don't have that right now. They don't have that access, but even general managers call me, can you get da-da-da-da? We get calls all the time from a GMA. Can you get me White Sox tickets? Well, I'm 2 calls away, right? Or 1 call away, or, who knows what it is. And, sometimes you get them for free. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes they'll trade off, Bears tickets for White Sox, whatever it is. But, you want to be able to do that. Or if someone wants to buy a house in Miami, well, we have real estate agents there, or the whole shooting match. But you want to be a connector, and you want to be able to get in touch with just about anybody anywhere.
The name of your agency is Authentic Athletics. Is that correct?
Correct.
And all right, so Peter Schaffer's, I don't know, he's out of commission. Let's say you had the flu or you need surgery. God forbid something happens to you. Who do they call?
They call me. There's no off days.
There's no off days.
There's no off days. Well, I mean, I've people, associates that work with me. My son's starting to do some NIL work, and it's fun to watch him. He's got some clients now that are in the transfer portal, and he sat next to me for 21 years. So whatever I can teach him in college or university is nothing compared to just sitting next to me for 21 years. And he knows as many secrets as anybody.
And this is your son, Gavin.
Yeah, Gavin. He's 21, and he's a redshirt junior at Mount St. Mary's. He graduated in 3 years, and now he's getting his MBA. Yep.
Excellent. He's also a lacrosse player, you said.
Yep. He's a lacrosse player and having a blast, and has great friends and having a great experience. And, and he's also a world-class chef. He has a meal prep company for athletes, and fantastic cook. And so he's got a lot of, he's doing an internship with our scouting conglomerate that we have, that Scott McClune and I have. And so he's got his hands on a lot of stuff. So you try to expose it to it and see what he's passionate about.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. It looks like he's learned so much from you, which brings me to, the name of the show is Negotiation Warriors. And the word warrior, right? It's a powerful word. And you have dealt with a great deal of adversity in your life. I'd be interested to know.
You mean just over and above my just naturally ugly looks and lack of athletic ability?
I can only imagine what that did to you. So I wasn't even thinking of that.
Yeah. So that was the first adversity I had to learn to live with.
Yes. And look how far you've come.
There you go.
But I would be interested to know, like, what does that word mean to you? And can you explain some of the adversity you've had to overcome over the past decade?
Well, so when, life goes on, and you get married, beautiful wife, we have 2 kids, a boy and a girl, everything's perfect. And when our daughter was a senior in high school, she had been having medical issues for roughly 8 to 10 months, incredible full body itching, low grade fevers. She was a world national champion equestrian. So they thought it was hay fever, and, all kinds of stuff. We took her to every possible expert or specialist. They couldn't figure it out. And then my wife finally took her to Children's Hospital, and I was coaching Gavin's hockey team. And it was a Thursday night. You always remember it. And Allison calls and says, "You need to come home. We just got a call from Children's. We have an appointment tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. With the oncologist." And, life is just puttering along, and Lillian's applying to college, Gavin's playing hockey, playing lacrosse. And all of a sudden you sit there, and they turn the screen around, the doctors, in this little exam room, and they circle this, what looked like a football, in her chest, and said, "Well, that's the tumor, and we have to admit her, and she's got cancer." So Lillian, intense chemo, radiation, the whole shooting match, knock on wood. And then so she beats cancer, and she takes a year off after high school, gap year, and just does her horses, and she's an artist now. And then she goes back to school, and then she's healthy now. And then about right during COVID, Gavin started feeling sick, and he started totally different symptoms. And everybody thought it was COVID, because nobody had any idea what COVID was or what the symptoms were or whatever. If you were sick, oh, you must have COVID. And so this starts in, February, March, COVID hits. April, we go to his doctor. They do all these tests. They come up completely different in Lillian's. We joke with Gavin's pediatrician saying, "Hey, my sister had cancer, and, there's no way." And she's like, "Well, there's no way you could have it. The odds are astronomical." And then right about middle of May during COVID, he went in for a biopsy, on a Thursday, and we don't hear back from on Friday. So we're like, all right, things must be good. We don't hear back from on Monday. And so all day everybody's on pins and needles. And then all of a sudden, I would take the boys out during COVID as a lacrosse coach of the high school. And we would take them out to this. The first thing I did during COVID is I took 2 lacrosse goals and a whole bunch of balls and we chained them up in a park. So that was sort of the boys' way to get away from COVID. Every afternoon at 5:00, went out and shot and ran around and whatever. So we're getting ready to go to the field to go shoot lacrosse, and then the oncologist calls. And it's never good when you have a family oncologist. A family pediatrician's good, a family accountant's good, but a family oncologist is never good. And they said that he had cancer also. And so the different part was, as opposed to the doctor telling Lillian, we then had to bring Gavin upstairs and tell him. And he was wound up at stage 4. So, 2 kids, cancer within 5 years. They both have made it through. Allison, obviously my wife, it was very stressful, obviously stressful on everybody, on her. 2 kids, 1 kid with cancer is tough enough, but 2 in 5 years. And, she did a wonderful job of trying to keep things normal in the house, through it all, normal dinners. We really, when Lillian was going through it, make sure that Gavin still played hockey and went to school. And, the sort of the interesting story that I have is that when Gavin got sick the night before he starts chemo, Lillian, who's very strong-willed but very quiet, she comes in the room, and he very rarely will go in Gavin's room, and they're right next to each other. And she goes, "I want to tell you what's going to happen." And so I said, "All right." And she goes, "Chemo's not as bad as you think it is. It sucks, and you're going to have a lot of stuff to deal with, but you'll get through it." And then she looks at him and goes, "I never threw up once in chemo. You better not throw up." And she walked out of the room. And so Gavin's like, "Wow, all right. The gauntlet's been laid." And it was one time during treatment, chemo, he's like, "Dad, I think I'm going to throw up. I can't do it. I got to suck it up." And you just see him clenching his mouth and his whole body. And for about an hour, just to make sure, he goes, I'm not going to give Lillian, I can't let her beat me.
Wow. So Lillian was 18 when she was
Gavin
diagnosed.
Gavin was 16 and 10 months. Yeah.
And what's their age difference?
4 years. So Lillian's 25 now. Gavin's 21 now. So Gavin's 4 years, almost 4 years out. Lillian's 6 years out.
Okay. So it was 2 years after Lillian was diagnosed that Gavin was?
Yes.
Man, you're so calm. Like, that's what I'm amazed by. Like, that's so much adversity and so much crisis for people to panic. First of all, your kids sound like they're pushing each other to get through this. How do you guys do this as a family? What's been this ingredient to overcome this?
Well, I made a decision, so as a father, that we weren't going to stress. That once we picked the doctors, Children's Hospital, everybody calls with, you can have this doctor, this is the greatest thing. I said, once we pick the doctor, they're the coach. We're not going to sit there and drive ourselves crazy and read every possible thing on the internet and say, well, what about doing this? And what about doing this? What about CBDs? And da, da, da. No, once you pick the doctor, that's got to be the call. Right. And then I think that Allison really did an unbelievable job of just being consistent, making sure the kids had normal lives, great meals, special. Every meal was special. Every treatment was special, and keep everything positive. But the other thing that helped was Lillian was great at equestrian. She would go to her barn and ride her horses every day during treatment. And so she was able to get outside. She just didn't sit on the couch, wallowing away. And Gavin actually played lacrosse every day during treatment, even played games during COVID, and got out. And there were some days he wasn't feeling well, and we let him, whatever. But, I think being with his teammates and his buddies, that helped a great deal. And then, everybody says that, oh, you guys use the word warriors, as parents. And I never felt that way. You could say warriors. The kids were warriors because they were the ones that were dealing with the life or death situation. We were just parents. And whenever you, as a parent, you get dealt with a situation, you got to deal with it. That's it. That's the score. It doesn't make you a warrior. It makes you a parent.
The mindset of that Lily and Gavin must have. What did you and Allison learn about them through this whole process?
Oh, that kids are a lot more resilient than you think they are. They're a lot smarter. You know, that, when we're reading stuff on the internet, I'm sure they were. It was funny because they're as close as siblings they are. Lillian never said a word to us. We never knew scared, happy, nervous, anxious. She was internalized everything. And Gavin, on the other hand, told us everything. I mean, and you could see that with him, he just was I don't feel this, or I'm worried here, or whatever, and you could see it. And it was interesting to see that both kids handling it differently.
How are they now?
Right now, they're both in remission, and they've moved on with their lives. And they've had this. They're both. So Gavin is the spokesperson for the Headstrong Foundation, which is the big lacrosse pediatric cancer foundation, and then Lillian is the spokesperson for the Morgan Adams Foundation, which is the big pediatric fundraising group out here in Denver. And actually, Allison works for the Morgan Adams Foundation now. So they are raising $6 to $10 million a year for pediatric research, which is even more important now because a lot of the funding has been curtailed. And you find out that in terms of pediatric cancer research, very little money is spent on it because there's just no money for pharmaceuticals. There's no money for the hospitals. It's all in adult cancer. So we need a lot of the treatment that the kids had for the lymphoma is 30 years old. It really hasn't changed much because there's no money being spent on pediatric cancer treatments. So the fact that they want to give it back to that is that's how they're paying it forward.
Well, man, you and your family are such a source of inspiration. Do you find yourself often trying to help others that are in a similar situation, talking them through what to expect going through this?
Yeah, we get a lot of calls and we try to do what we can and help out. We've a couple of the kids that we have helped out didn't make it, and that's just tears your heart apart from the inside and the outside, especially when you realize that our kids made it, right? And you go to these foundation dinners and galas, and the pictures on the wall, and not all of them made it. Or the one thing is, like, when you go to Children's Hospital, and the thing about Children's Hospital, each floor is different specialty. There's the orthopedic floor and this floor. And the seventh floor is the cancer floor and the oncology floor. And everybody there, when you walk in there, has cancer. All the kids. That's the deal. Nobody's there with the flu, and nobody's there with a blister, and nobody's there with a broken finger. Everybody in that room. And then you sit there and you look at the numbers, and some of these kids aren't making it out of there. And I do remember, when Gavin's first treatment, he looked at Alice and said, "Mom, I don't want to be here," because he had been there with Lily. And like, I get it. But that was the deal, because everybody there had it, and some of those kids don't make it out. So that makes you feel how blessed you are that we were able to make it out. And so you do want to give it back to up the numbers so that more kids do make it out.
How did going through all this, did this change your perspective as an agent and or negotiator?
I don't know. I think that I always thought I had good perspective, but it does give you a chance when players complain about certain little things, like, really? That's what we're worried about? Come on now. That's what we're worried about? I think that they're bigger issues. And, I think that we have to expect our athletes. The one thing that they have to do is give back too, because in our society, we don't really have royalty. So our royalties are entertainers and our athletes, and we need role models. And that's why, and the politicians have become role models now, and we need them not just to be successful at what they do and good at their profession, but in how they do it, and play like champions and do things the right way, and show the next generation how to succeed, but the right way.
Let's shift a little bit. I'm going to talk to you about money. Okay. Specifically player contracts. Why do you think that there is so much public fascination about how much money is paid to a professional athlete?
Well, shoot, it's the interesting thing is they win the lottery. These players win the lottery, and because the money that they're making is up there. The Powerball is what, $1 billion now, whatever. And some of these guys are making $100 million contracts and $250 million contracts, and so you have this lottery ticket. But the difference is, as opposed to just buying a ticket, they worked for it, and so that's interesting. But I do think that there is a corresponding responsibility to that to give back. But the fans are definitely fascinated. But the other thing is, they also think every player is making like LeBron makes. They think, and even some of the players, when they get in their families, oh my God, I'm in the NFL, so we're making this, making, no, rookie in the NFL makes a signing bonus of $100,000. I'm not going to say only $100,000, but $100,000 in the first year base is $740. So they're making $840,000. It's a hell of a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but that's not what LeBron makes. That's not what some of the baseball players make, right? And that's not what Patrick Mahomes is making. $500 million. The rank and file are not there, but everybody thinks they are, and all the friends think they are. Oh, you're making, in the NFL, you could pick up this, you could pick up this. No. You still have to be careful. And then we're seeing it now in college football, where players are making money in NIL that they've never heard of. Offensive linemen are making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year to play college football, which they deserve. But at the same time, that's not enough money. That's not lottery money now.
How much of that fascination, though, do you think stems from either one, people just like to count other people's money? Or is it more, it kind of signifies that the investment made by their favorite team somehow correlates to success?
Well, that's what really separates the NFL from all the other sports, the salary cap, so that each team does have an equal chance to succeed. This year, I mean, how many teams, when you look at it, the standings this year are in the playoffs, and we're picking in the top 10 last year. You can go from the bottom to the top. Last year, Washington picked second in the draft and went to the NFC Championship. The Bears had been down in the dumps, and right now they're, in first place in their division. So I think that having a salary cap, and Wellington Marrow's one that said we want to split the national TV money evenly, allows every team to have a chance to succeed. In baseball, unless you're a big market team, it's going to be very rare you're going to be in the playoffs. We're here in Colorado, and if the Rockies go 500, it's a good year. So I do think that everybody is fascinated by the money, and the money is extreme. But if you think about what these players do and how many people watch the National Football League, it's just the greatest reality TV program of all time. Some of the scripts this year of what has happened in the game, where there's a fumble in the fourth quarter, then the referee makes a bad play or bad call, and then, oh my God, the other night, down by 14 points, they come back, the Bears come back and tie the game up, right? Because on the big fourth down play, they double the wrong guy, and the guy gets open in the end zone. I mean, you can't script this stuff. TV can't script this stuff, and it just happens in live, right in front of our face. The fans are into it. The TV production is unbelievable. And, you're having regular season football games higher than every other event other than the Oscars. And it's fascinating. It's great to be just a little bit of part of, but but that's the deal. Is the money's there is because we have 330 million people in the country, and now we're international in the NFL and the NBA. So, like I said, we don't have royalty anymore. It used to be royalty. This is our royalty.
And there's a lot of important professions out there. We talked about surgeons and pilots earlier. Does it bother you, though, or does it help or hurt that professional athletes' salaries are made publicly available?
No, I think that, it's part of the deal. If you're going to be in the public limelight and you're going to make this, and you're going to have to deal with people looking into your lives and following you around like the paparazzi, and, who are you dating? And, you broke up with this person. It just comes with territory. That, the famous story is, I think this was 1930 or something, and Babe Ruth was the first person make over $100,000 a year in salary, and the president was making $80,000 a year. And I think it was Harding or whatever, whoever was the Coolidge or Harding, whoever was the president during the Depression. And he said, babe, how do you feel that you make more money than the president? And he responded, well, I had a better year than the president.
4 decades in the business. I've met so many people. I'm going to talk to you more about your relationships, but as you were coming up in the business, who were some of the greatest negotiators that you either dealt with or learned from?
Well, I'm very blessed, and I don't mean to drop names. And of course, George Clooney once told me it's not polite to drop names, Cliff. So the first one, I was fortunate enough when I first started the business that George Young, who was the general manager of the Giants, took me under his wing. And George was a high school teacher in Baltimore public schools. And somehow he got tied up to the Colts in the 60s and worked his way up to be a general manager. No advanced degree, no MBA, no law degree, no nothing. And for whatever reason, he took me under his wing when and I think the player was Lance Smith, was with the Giants. And everybody says, who's the toughest negotiator? And of course, there always was Paul Brown because, they didn't pay a lot of money. But no, it's easy to say no. That's not negotiations. To be, just to be rigid. No, that's not negotiations. George, when you would negotiate with George Young, high school teacher, no professional training, and I've got this, and I've got my book ready to go, and I'm ready to go, and I've got my statistics, I've got this big proposal, and I've broken down everything that I can break down. And, let's say first a running back, and I know it's 4.6 yards per carry, and he's got 29 TDs, and his third down success ratio is 46%. He had 1 fumble, and I've got every statistic possible. And every time I would say something, he goes, yeah, but what was his yards per carry in December? It was 3.8 yards. And then what about at night games? 3.6 yards. What about the 2 fumbles he had against Dallas? So every time I made a salient point based upon empirical data, George just hit me back like a ping pong, or a tennis player like Martina Navratilova, just hitting forehand after forehand right by me. And that's what a good negotiator is. And George was that kind of guy. And he could be rough and he could be gruff, but it wasn't no. It was, he came back. Every point you made, he had 4, and it was right on the tip of his tongue. He was as prepared as anybody. He had it. Boom, 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 boom. You're like, oh. And then finally he just said, no mas. All right, where do we sign? I will tell you a funny story. So the other person that took me in was a guy named Mike Holovac. And Mike was the general manager of the Houston Oilers back in the late 80s, and old school. And he was with the Jets when Joe Namath was with the Jets. And he told this story to me where Weeb Eubank, who was the head coach and GM of the Jets, with Namath. And back then, you didn't have to be signed to go to training camp. You had to be signed to play the regular season. So players would actually show up to training camp without a contract. And what Weeb would do is he would bring the player in between, and they did 3 days back then. Forget about 2 days. They were doing 3 days in July and August in humidity and heat. And he would bring a player in and say, okay. And the player would have all this notes and he's ready to go with, I started this and I played this many plays. And then we would just sit there and he'd turn the heat up in the office. So it was already 90 degrees outside. He's turned the heat up. Player's already been to 2 days and he can't keep his eyes open. And we would just look at it, did not say anything for 20 minutes. And the player's falling asleep. And finally, the player's like, I want 15,000. And we started at 10. He goes, all right, here's 10,100. And he'd slide the offer across. And finally, the player's just like, all right, I'll sign anywhere. I just need to get back to my dorm room and get to sleep. And that's how old school negotiations went.
He just would wear them down.
Wear them down. Yep. He knew it.
So, all right. So for George Young, it sounds like one of the biggest takeaways you got from that is really incredible preparation, right? He wouldn't be able to counter you with it without knowing the facts.
That's right. You want to have all the preparation. You want to have all the statistics. You want to be ready for every possible counter move. If the team wants to do this, they want to go to 4 years. Why don't we want to go to 4 years? They want to go, put the signing bonus here, deferred. Okay, well, this player is not getting, not as good as this player. You just want to make sure that whatever they say, you have ready to go. and you have to prepare.
When I interviewed another agent, he also talked about Ted Phillips, and this leads me to the Weeb Eubank analogy, that he made it very difficult for agents to get concessions. So no matter what it was, he made them really, really work hard for it before he gave something up. Is that a good takeaway also that you're getting from Weeb Eubank?
Well, with Weeb, right? I never negotiated against Weeb. That's way ahead of my time. But with as I call him, Theodore, I found a way to have a relationship with him. And so it's not just call up and say, here's what we want. You know, find out certain things, find out about their family, their lives, what matters, football philosophies, the whole shoot match. Sometimes you just call up and talk and don't even talk about your client. And you have relationships and let them know that, hey, here's some ideas that can help you. You give me some ideas that help me. So Ted, after our first one, and even with David Tate, it was never acrimonious because I was at least justifying my position. And as relationship moved on, Ted was great. We always had a great relationship. And sometimes people that are more gruff or stoic or whatever, are harder to have a relationship with or get to know because they don't want to have that. But you got to find a way. In this business, you got to find a way to have a relationship with everybody. Paul Brown of the Bengals, gosh, Mike Brown. Mike and I have a very, very good relationship. And he might say 8 words a year. I hope he says 2 of those to me, a quarter of them to me.
Me, like when I think of you, that's a superpower I think you have that not everybody has, is your ability to relate to so many different people, making all of us in the front office feel like, you know, we were your friend, that we could trust you. Tell us more about, is that just a natural skill that you have? I even heard you talk about on another podcast or a show where, you know, you were coaching lacrosse. This is not even being an agent. And, you know, like a federal judge called you and you had to, you know, and your client's takeaway was and you were coaching a game and you were dealing with like a major legal issue, and you don't have to tell the whole story, but my takeaway was that your client got from that you just got everybody's guard down and just turned the whole thing around by relationships, it sounded like.
Right. So actually, Daniel Snyder sued myself and Scott McLuhan. It's a funny story. He sued us because someone put out, and it's sort of topical now, someone put out a story on a website in India. I'm talking about the country of India, that Daniel Snyder was somehow connected to Jeffrey Epstein. And he sued us because he thought we leaked this information to this website in India. And he sued us here in Denver Federal District Court. And it was actually during COVID. So there were no hearings. All the hearings were on Zoom. And the hearing went over, but I had to go coach the boys' high school team. And so I'm like, sure, I'll go do it during a Zoom. So I'm there. The judge says, well, it seems a little windy in the background, Mr. Schaffer. So I'm coaching the high school. He goes, what high school? I said, well, I coach South. He goes, well, my son played lacrosse at East. And Snyder, it was me as the only person representing us, little old me. And Snyder had 6 or 7 lawyers, 2 in Denver and 4 big city New York lawyers. And they're running all this stuff through. And once we heard that, we're like, we're fine. We're going to be just fine here. Because, you know, Colorado's a very sort of small town, parochial. Denver is not a big city. It's a lot of people, but not a big city. Yep. So having those relationships and the fact that I was giving back to the community by coaching at the local inner city high school, I think the judge realized, yeah, he's not such a bad guy.
How do we take that? So we take your skill at building relationships, then we want to talk to current and future negotiators that want to get better at it. How can they become better negotiators by maximizing their ability to build relationships?
Well, I think the first thing they have to do is, it is not just negotiators, but any profession you want. When you and I were growing up, would go to these buildings that had books in them. I think they call them libraries, right? And that's where we would get all this information. You'd actually have to pull a book out, sign it out, and you'd have to bring it back in 2 weeks or you have to pay a fine. Now, with the internet the way it is, if you want to, whatever profession you want to go into, marketing, orthopedic surgeon, there's just so many articles, so many books that you could just, on your phone at night, read, study. I mean, I've got every book on every negotiator. I read books on generals, on how to lead, leadership. You always just want to if this is what you're going to do, you want to just get as much information as you can. And it's right there on the tip of your tongue or tip of your finger, tip of your phone. And we have a situation where, you now have you have ChatGPT and AI. And I tell the students, I said, well, you can use ChatGPT. It's just so much easier. Like if right now you told me like there's a player, what about this player? I hit ChatGPT. It's not telling me everything, but it gives me a basics. It can't do the work for you, but study. If you want to sit there and say, what are the best books to read about being a sports agent? Hit ChatGPT. Let it give you the 20 books and then go either buy them or check them out of the library or grab them online somehow. That's how you get it. Or what are the best articles, or what are the great negotiation stories? When I go for my run every day, I'm not a big music guy, but I put on either YouTube or some type of documentary about whether it's a World War II general or, podcasts like your podcast. And that's what I listen to when I'm running. I always want to just take that time, the precious few hours we have every day, and try to learn as much as we can.
You mentioned ChatGPT recommending books, but is there one main book that you would want to tell people that either want to be in sports or agent? Read this book. Do you have anything in mind?
Well, I've been sent a bunch of manuscripts of that. A lot of them haven't been published. Richard Bertelsen, the National Football League Players Association General Counsel, sent me his book. I think it's fascinating. I've got a book here that I have. Give me a second. That I keep on my desk, and it's "Never Ask Why" by Ed Garvey, who was basically the first. Here it is, and I'm not getting any commission or any royalties on this, but "Never Ask Why" is a book that Ed Garvey wrote. He was the first head of the Players Association. Actually, Thomas Delaney, the contract negotiator for the Raiders, sent that to me a few years back. Just a fascinating book. And those are the stuff. But any book you can get some out of every book. I get, books that, Lee Steinberg, who's a competitor of mine, wrote a book. And, I've read that. Ernie Corsi, the general manager of the Giants, read a book.
So I had Lee Steinberg on, and we talked about Winning with Integrity, which was written before I even started working for the Bears, when he was kind of at the height of his career. And I used sections of it in my class. Is that the book you're referring to?
Yeah, yep. Absolutely.
Okay. The other question I have for you, Peter, too, is that, and then I'll wrap up with one final question. But before that, because you've dealt with so many people, you've dealt with me, you've dealt with experienced people, and you have to be a chameleon because you've dealt with much less experienced people. You're probably even dealing with college front office people. What are some of the common mistakes that you see that come from people working in the front office or even agents?
Well, I think that, first of all, agents tend to talk too much. I think one of the greatest attributes of any negotiator is the ability to listen. Okay. You don't have to win every conversation. You don't have to dominate every conversation. There's sometimes that, I get on the phone and the guy just wants to go. And that's why I don't like to do Zooms, because, I could multitask here in my office while they're just droning on. So I think listening is definitely the most important thing. It's a tremendous quality, not just in negotiations, but in life. It tells you what other people feel, what their issues are, the whole shoot match. Number one. Number two, with regards to teams, a lot of times, that, like, if I was negotiating with you, there were certain times that I knew that you had the authority to get a deal done. And then there are other times I'm like, wow, this is way over Cliff's head. He's going to have to go to either the general manager or Ted Phillips, because we're asking for something that either you've never done before or authority monetarily that's above your pay grade. If we're doing an undrafted free agent deal for 10, 15,000, you had that. If we're doing, a $10 million signing bonus deal and we want it paid about right now, you might not have had that authority. So you would have to get it. But a lot of times the negotiator will sit there and say, well, I need to go talk to Ted, or I need to go talk to Ryan, or whoever it is, and I'll get back to you. And I always say, don't do that. Just say, let me think about it and get back. Don't ever let someone know that you don't have the authority.
I like that one.
Yeah. I mean, You just say, I'll get back to you. Don't tell me that I can't do it because, no, I don't. Why are you doing it? Nobody needs to know that you don't have the authority.
Right, because that could be construed as a tactic too, right? That you're just using this invisible person that you don't have to get to deal with directly as an excuse to why you can or can't do something. It's hard to negotiate against that, right?
Correct.
You kind of answered this, but one final question. I know we talked about listening, and we also talked about preparation, but if you had to name, what are the 3 or 4 most important traits of being a great negotiator?
Preparation, patience, listening, and then knowing your client's will, ability to get where you want to go. I mean, if the client is not going to be strong, you can be as strong as you want. You got nothing. So your client has to, if your client wants something, you got to make sure he or she's ready to, uh, hold the line. If you have a client who's not ready to hold the line, then you don't have anything. You're only as strong as the weakest link.
Did you have detailed conversations with your clients on that topic before you get into a negotiation?
Absolutely. You got to be able to sit there and say, are you ready to do this? You want to hold out? Okay. Can you withstand this? Are you, I was doing a deal, Joe Thomas, and I think we were trying to get to 84 million over 6 years, making the highest paid tackle. And I'm in the Browns facility, and Matt Thomas is a wonderful person, great negotiator, was doing the deal with Tommy Hecker, and Holmgren was the general manager, the head coach at the time. No, he was just a GM. I think Pat Sherman was head coach. And they had offered like 74 million. And I knew I can get 84. And Joe looks at me and goes, you're going to turn it down? I'm like, yeah. He goes, you're turning down 74. What is wrong with you? I said, I can get this. And he looks at me and goes, you got this? I said, Joe, I got this. But it was many months and years of preparation as to why that number made sense. It wasn't an artificial number. It was a number based upon empirical data of what the tackles were, what the market was, where the salary cap was going, a whole bunch of different things that, I had a situation today where I've got a player in the NIL world, and the school is actually making a proposal with incentives, playtime incentives for a college kid. And I said, this is a great example, Michael, where, this is what's going to happen in the NFL. Let's use this as a learning experience, because this is, $50,000 incentive, but in the NFL it could be $1 million incentive. And so we actually use that opportunity to teach a college kid, this is what's going to happen.
So you also touched on what I think is another important trait when your conversation with Joe Thomas, your ability to have a certain level of emotional stability, to take emotions out of it. I think it's another reason why players need agents. You and I have had conversations about this, about specific situations in the past where players choose to not have an agent. Talk about that for a minute on, that conversation with Joe Thomas reminds me of how important your ability to remove emotion from the negotiation.
Well, Abraham Lincoln from Illinois said, he who represents himself as a fool for a client. And it's not because the client can't be smart enough. Richard Sherman always wanted to negotiate his own deals, and he and I have actually gone back and forth on all kinds of stuff, arguing, yes, you're smart enough to do it. But like you say, it's emotional and you're subjective and you're arguing, and there's other, how can you really look at it objectively? And then the other thing is that when you are negotiating, the other side is going to say things that are going to be, hey, look, I get it, but he's not the greatest running back, or he's not the greatest cornerback. We love him. He's our guy. And sometimes as the agent, we have to sort of filter through what really said, because we know that when the deal is done, he or she's got to go play for that team. And you don't want him going in the building saying, well, the coach says I'm not the best running back. So it is nice to have that buffer and that filter to have it. And I think that all players should have an agent because of that. And yes, I get it. One of the most important things that we can do as the agent community is to educate people as to our value. Okay. And when players say, well, I'm paying you $100,000 a year to represent me, I, first of all, want to make sure that they're getting $200,000 or $300,000 worth of value. And then, of course, I then say to them, well, I wish you were paying me $500,000 a year, because, we work on a 3% basis. He goes, well, that's a lot of money. I said, well, just think how much you're making it. All right. That's how you have to think about it. I wish if every one of my players was paying me $500,000 a year, that means every one of my players is making $15 million a year. That would be a good thing. Right. I guess on some level, I wish the players paid me $3 million a year, because that means they're making $100 million a year. Just like the same thing with taxes. I pay a lot of money in taxes. That's a good thing. It means you're making a lot of money. That's how I look at it.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you being here. You are a true negotiation warrior, a legend in this business. Super humble person, but a good friend to many. And I appreciate all your support over the years, and hope as you're on a run one of these days and you get to turn on Negotiation Warriors podcast, and now you're part of it. So thank you.
Well, the problem is going to be, Cliff, is this one went for an hour. I don't like to run for an hour, so I'm going to try to find the shorter ones. Maybe Ted will be much shorter, I'm sure. I'll listen to the Ted Phillips one.
Don't worry. We will edit it. Don't worry.
All right.
But thank you. You've been awesome. Keep going, because you've so many different stories. Like, people are going to be so interested in your career. So thank you for giving back, giving your time, helping me. It's great to see you. Great to talk to you.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Really, my goal is to try to help the next generation be better than we are, have better lives than we do, better society, do things the right way. Where Lee talks about winning with integrity, that's something that should never go away. Doing things the right way all the time, and it's just not words. You want to do that. You want to make sure everybody's doing things the proper way. That's the best way to have a great society. And we live in the greatest society in the history of the world. I hope tomorrow, someone will sit there and say, it's even better tomorrow, and it's even better the next day.
Well said, Peter. Appreciate you. Great to see you.
Thank you for listening to Negotiation Warriors. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe on the Negotiation Warriors YouTube channel and follow us at Front Office 360 on Instagram and X. And to find out how we're helping college athletic programs, go to frontoffice360.com.